Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and today's donation deck is Xira, the Golden Sting. Another look at the deck coming from Xira. Thank you, Xira, for supporting the channel. This deck is an Aristocrats egg-laying reanimation kind of build. We're going to be taking a better look at all its different features soon, but first, Xira says that they've made a few changes since the first draft, adding some cards, switching some cards out, and they're thinking of adding more additional combat steps to allow the commander to trigger more. But they're having a hard time sacking their opponent's creatures, so it feels like maybe they should be using their own creatures. I think that's what they're saying here. They're also looking for more ways to optimize the deck in this draft, and they've added a bunch of cards to the sideboard that they'd like to include, but they're not sure what to cut. So absolutely, we will take a look. I have very few suggestions this time, but we will take a look through the sideboard cards and see what Xira's ideas are and what directions we can go with the deck. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. All right, so before we go any further, as we always do, it's a great time to take a look at our commander and see what they do. Xira is a 4-mana insect assassin in black, red, and green. That's Jund colors. They are 3/3 flying haste, and whenever they attack, they put an egg counter on another creature without an egg counter. And when that creature dies, if it had an egg counter on it, draw a card and create a 1/1 black Beador insect creature token with flying. So I'm not going to go too much over the commander again, because we're kind of finalizing this deck. And at this point, I feel like I recommend looking at the other deck videos if you want to see how this deck has been put together. But in the meantime, this commander is what you see is what you get. And I will briefly go over what I always do, is that this commander is kind of really hard to kind of break. You know, there's not the trigger that we're trying to take advantage of is an attacks trigger. There's not a lot of ways to get extra attacks in. And even if we proliferate the egg counters, they don't really do anything. And even if we move the egg counters, that also doesn't do anything. So a bit tricky to work out. So this current approach, we're trying to focus egg counters on our own creatures so that we can break those eggs that way, and we're going to focus on additional combats to see what we can do with that. All right, looking at the deck, honestly, I think it's in a very good position. We're going to go over these sideboard cards, which are the additions that Xira is suggesting or thinking about, but as a whole, looking through the deck, I think the deck is just in a really, really nice place. We've got a pretty good curve. There is an outlier, but we'll get to that in a moment. But the rest of the deck functions really, really well. We have a lot of, low mana, strong cards. We have a bunch of different, what I would call engine pieces or accelerants, such as Sakura Tribe Elder, engine pieces like Zulaport Cutthroat. And then 3 mana and higher, we're usually going into value things like Braids, like Mayhem Devil, Scoot Swarm, Spitting, I'm not going to pronounce that. Kind of things that either are gaining us value by doing the combo or setting up for a really big combo, a few more enablers, and then finishers mostly in the top one. So generally, when it comes to the shape of it, I do like the deck. We are at 35 lands. I wouldn't mind that being 36 or 37. We are kind of top heavy, but as always, we'll go through those cards in a second. I don't want to spend too much time on the other cards because these are all cards that I have either suggested or I've already okayed. And generally, I have very little to say. The deck is just really, really nice. Like I said, I think I have, and I'm going to look over here now, I think I have a total of 5 of my own suggestions, but mainly we're going to look here. But before we do that, let's talk about our 5-mana curve. So we have 7 5-mana cards, and that's even more than our 4-mana cards, and mainly because, as I always say, we try to keep our 4 mana, because this is the mana cost of our commander, low, and we will come back to this in a second. But at 5 mana, we've got quite a few cards here, so much so that they kind of like create this bump. And with that in mind, I think we have to be a little picky once again. So first I'm going to get the elephant out of the room. Last time I suggested taking out Radiant Performer, and I was absolutely roasted. Just pulled through the coals in the comments about how that was a bad decision, and that's true. I think I really undervalued what this card can do on the right board, because basically it's going to make every single creature have an egg counter. And since we don't need Xira out for those egg counters to do anything, we're in a really good position even if we lose Xira. We just need the trigger, cast in Radiant Performer, and bam, everything has an egg counter, including the Performer, which is really, really nice. Kind of gross, but really, really nice. So I was wrong about this card. It's great. Now let's look at the other ones. So I'm going to do something different. Instead of going through all of them, I'm going to go through them strongest to weakest, and hopefully that'll help. The next strongest one I would say for sure is Moldervine Reclamation. I would actually argue this one is the strongest. I talked a little bit about this last time, which is why I put a lot of... I really do like this card. I think this is a very, very strong card, and for people who have not experienced its strength, I would argue it is the reason to add green to Aristocrats deck. It is just such a powerful card. So this is probably the strongest one. After that, Mazarek is pretty close. Mazarek is just a very powerful win condition at 5 mana. It's its own body to grow and can immediately start getting dividends by playing this, sacrificing, put a bunch of +1/+1 counters on your board, and go for a really big attack. So Mazarek very easily would be the second reason to run green in Aristocrats, so it fits here very, very well. Radiant Performer is somewhere in there, and then let's look at the rest. So I would say probably at the remaining ones, so Seedborn Muse and Sir Conrad the Grim are cards that I consider to be very, very close in the same power level. They're both really strong cards. Sir Conrad the Grim is really, really good in Aristocrat shells, just represents so much power, but does tend to get better with self-mill effects, which we're not running any of those, or discard effects, which we're also not running a lot of those. So with that in mind, our opponents may be, but this is a really, really strong card and a good mana sink. We'll get back to that in a second. And I would say that because of the build we're in, this is slightly stronger than Seedborn Muse, and Seedborn Muse is just very, very good. Now, usually I like Seedborn Muse with a flash enabler so that you can spend that mana during your opponent's turns, but we do have things like this mana sink here, so I don't really mind it. But I will say this is the kind of build that Seedborn Muse is not as strong in. Let's see how many instants we have. We have a good amount of instants, but a lot of them are reactive and less so proactive. So we have to ensure that we have cards that have mana abilities, or we have relevant sacrifices on other people's turns, which we do have some. So she's not terrible here, but I would argue that she's not, carrying her usual weight of power. With that in mind, let's see. We're now getting to the last two, and I think this is where we fall off. Kulrath Knight, I think I was kind of picky on it last time. I'm going to be even more picky this time. I do respect that what this can do is put a lot of really good, because it's any counters and it's not just -1/-1 counters, it's a really good way to shut down creatures on your opponent's side. But overall, this is one creature away from that going away. Kulrath Knight is easy to destroy, it's vulnerable to a lot of removal, and as soon as that's gone, all the work that you've done is undone. And I think this is notable because, as our deck builder mentioned in their comment, it is not very worthwhile to put the eggs in your opponent's creatures as opposed to yours, because generally you have more control about destroying your own creatures than your opponent's. And with that in mind, this card kind of goes against that mentality. It incentivizes us to put our eggs into someone's giant creature, right? Someone's like Blightsteel Colossus or something like that. But Blightsteel Colossus will never die traditionally anyway, so that wouldn't really do anything. So we're giving up 1/2 of what our deck does for the benefit of this card that can easily be removed, negating its own effect, right? So with that in mind, Kulrath Knight is probably the weakest or second weakest here, but I think it's a pretty close tie to Ant Queen. Ant Queen especially next to Sir Conrad the Grim is looking really unimpressive, right? Sir Conrad at least has a passive static ability that will affect the board no matter what happens, but the Ant Queen, all it has is this mana sink ability. And I feel like if this was like on an enchantment or something like that, I'd probably be a lot easier on it, but it's not. Like, even if you had one of those buyback cards, I'm thinking of, yeah, you know what is it? Let's see, buyback and Sapperling. Sprout Swarm. I honestly think Sprout Swarm is the better version of this card. Now, I will say, I do recognize that this does not create insects, but Sprout Swarm is really, really good. It is a very good token creation, especially when you're going wide. It's instant speed. It's Convoke, so it's basically, it's 5 mana to get a Sapperling and draw this card back into your hand. And with Convoke, all of your other creatures help pay for it, which incidentally works really, really well with Seedborn Muse, because now that's a reason to use this card, right? You're getting the most out of it by getting more and more Sapperling tokens. So with that in mind, I can't believe I didn't think of that before. That would be my switch. Just completely switch out Ant Queen for Sprout Swarm. And you know what? For the sake of it, I'm going to take a moment to try to do the math. So Ant Queen is 7 mana for the first additional token. For the first 1/1. I'm not going to count the Ant Queen herself, because she's just as much as a liability as she is a 5/5. So I'm just putting that to the side. So Sprout Swarm is, or let's do it this way. Let's think about the first cast doesn't count. So it's 7 for the first one and 9 for the second one. Sprout Swarm is 5 for the first one, then at least 4 for the next one, and then at least 3 for the next one, because we're counting those sprouts as able to tap for this Sprout Swarm effect. So with that in mind, eventually Sprout Swarm becomes quote unquote free, because the Sapperlings you've created out of Sprout Swarm, as long as there's 5 or more, they will pay for the next Sprout Swarm for free. So though like at first this will create more bodies on the battlefield or more power, eventually Sprout Swarm will overtake it in, especially if we're untapping our creatures with Seedborn Muse, which I really, really like. So I didn't mean to, I wasn't going to suggest this, but this is actually a fantastic suggestion. Please play this card. All right, and so with that in mind, I would cut that. I would probably still cut Kulrath Knight, and that would probably make this just a little more manageable, going down to the same number as 4 and just a bit under over 6. But I will take one more second to look at our 4-drops once again. Okay, so this comes down to Mirkwood Bats and Pitiless Plunderer. Both of these I do really like, so I think this is fine. I think depending on how the build shakes out, because there's a few things I want to say about Reanimation, Mirkwood Bats may not be as good. Mirkwood Bats is a card I really like, but I do have a problem with it, because it tends to be put tangentially in. What do I mean by that? Well, if this is an Aristocrats deck, right? If we think of that primarily of using like Carrion Feeder, using, where are we? Zulaport Cutthroat, and then Mayhem Devil, and then sacrificing a creature here and there to do triggers. Where are we? Mirkwood Bats doesn't really do much in that kind of setup, right? It requires you to create and sacrifice tokens, yes, and you're probably going to try to do that, obviously with our commander, obviously with our like token generators, but it has nothing to do with the Aristocrats side of it, right? Out of all the cards I named, it doesn't actually care about anything outside the fact that using Carrion Feeder to sacrifice those creatures is going to be nice, but it really cares about things like, Scoot Swarm generating the tokens, right? Like, that's the part it cares about. It doesn't care about any other aspect of the Aristocrats strategy. So with that in mind, I'm going to stamp an asterisk on this card. I want you to pay attention to how this plays. And I don't know how much testing that you've gotten to do since the last draft, but And that's something maybe I should ask, that if you're setting a new draft, can you tell me how much testing you've done? Because it does affect my suggestions, because sometimes we just haven't tested things enough to figure out how far ahead we've gotten. But the bats, I think, need testing in this kind of shell, because I think they're good, but I think they're good with nothing to do with the Aristocrats shell. And if we are leaning into that shell, we should not really care for this card as much, is my opinion. But with that in mind, I don't want to put too much pressure on it. Now, I don't know if Breath of Fury was in the previous build. I actually have not checked, but I want to take a second to say, like, obviously, we talked a little bit about extra combats. This one is obviously the best, right? This one is you enchant a creature, you attack with everything, you put an egg counter onto it, and then you sacrifice it and attach this to another creature, right? And then hopefully with an egg counter on it, and then you create the bee. And then the next attack, you put it back on that first bee, sacrificing the second creature and creating a new bee. And then you just alternate, because you can put eggs into bees. You can put eggs, it's not non-token, so you can just keep going back and forth, and there's your infinite attack phase combo. Really, really nice. And in the meantime, you're drawing cards, so that's pretty good. So obviously this is the best one, and we will look at the other ones, but it is worth noting that this is the best one by far, and I would never ask you to take it out. So the rest is good. I think I want to poke at Dragon Lair Spider again, just one more time. I just still don't see this card being very, very strong, even with Parallel Season. That's mixing two cards. Parallel Lives. It just feels like it's a lot of work to get some weak creatures onto the battlefield, but that's just my opinion, man. I just don't really like this card. I don't like cards when we don't have a lot of interaction with, but I do understand that the ceiling of this is really, really high. And just in comparison, I feel like the Broodmother is just so much better. A card that I was hard on, but I've warmed up to. And Dragon Lair Spider. Like, the thing is, they're too similar, but without being the same thing. If they were the same thing, I'd be like, yeah, I get it, you're playing redundancy. But they're not exactly the same thing. They require you to play a little different. Whereas, like, the really nice thing about the Broodmother is that she is both sack outlet and token generation. I mean, like, sack outlet generation in a way, which is a weird way to look at it. But I like that combination very much so. Whereas the Dragon Lair Spider is just token generation, which is good, but not the same thing. So that's what I have to say. Okay, the rest of this is really nice. Oh, I will say also Mosswood Dread Knight catches my eye as a card I don't particularly like. It is in and of itself a mana sink. It's like 4 mana to cycle it over and over again. And there are ways you can take advantage of that, but I think that's too much mana. And in the meantime, it's really, really clunky and just not a very good creature for Commander. Like this should be, honestly, if we can swap it based on, but this is a bit of a budget call. This should really be just Dark Confidant instead. If you want to be drawing cards, just play Dark Confidant. You'll just have a better time, and yeah, it'll die and won't come back, but you'll be happy. But your mana is being pulled in so many directions. I don't think you have the ability to keep using these cards. Okay. Before we go to the sideboard cards, I want to go to my suggestions really, really quickly, because they're going to exemplify what I think of these other cards. So let's go through them pretty easily. So the first one is Unearth. I think Unearth is always just very, very good in these kind of decks. I just like it. I like the fact that it cycles. I think it just offers a lot to you, and we have a lot of really, really good 3 mana and lower creatures. Like, I'd be really happy to be reanimating Mayhem Devil, Scoot Swarm. I'd be really, really happy, even just Ewit to grab something else, Braids, Chatterfang. These are all really, really good cards that I'm just pretty happy to be reanimating. Not even mentioning like Sakura Tribe Elder for another trigger, Jury to just start pumping it, or our Blood Artist effects from the graveyard. So those are really, really nice, and I think it's definitely worth just unearthing them and getting that kind of advantage. After which, I've probably suggested this every time. I just imagine I do because I always do. But Lightning Bolt just continues to be a great card. Until the day I die, I will always say if you're in red and have the means to play it, Lightning Bolt is very much so on your side. It is. I would play it over Village Rites in a deck like this because that removal is just really, really good, and it's going to save you at times by taking out a key commander, taking out a key creature. You know, if you play around and people are dropping, Esper Sentinel turn 1, you need to be able to deal with that card. Even if you're not the one who is feeding the Esper Sentinel, you do have a lot, about, let's see, 16, 25, 35. So more than a third of your deck is non-creature spells. So if someone drops Esper Sentinel and you're in setup phase, you might be triggering it, and having that 1 mana answer and to also pay for the Esper Sentinel is just really, really important. Also, it'll stop your opponents from feeding at the whitefish, and that's a big thing too. So having just clean removal at for just 3 damage is just something you should be doing. All right, now these next 3 cards are kind of the main reason I want to go through my additions first before looking at yours, is that I noticed there is a bit of an issue that this deck has, and it is mana. This deck is mana hungry. Now, it's less so than previous iterations, but we still have what I would consider a lot of mana sinks. Like currently, as I've said, both Ant Queen and, where are we? Sir Conrad are both really good mana sinks. We've got Chatterfang, and we also have what I would consider to be a lot of really good high mana spells, right? A lot of 3-drops, a lot of 4-drops, a lot of 5-drops, and most importantly, and the main reason I wanted to attack, because usually my answer to this is to cut down the curve, but then I look over here and you can see that the curve is still very, very high. You're struggling to fight that urge to put more high mana cards in, and I get them. These cards are very, very. I get you because these cards are very, very good, but we do have to think about how are we getting there. So I wanted to offer 3 different cards for 3 different strategies to kind of get there and ensure that we can cast these cards. So the first one is basically, I want to say more ramp, but specifically in this deck, we can play Harvest Season without much of a problem here. Harvest Season is a tricky card to play. I really like it when it's good, and I really hate it when it's bad. But in certain decks, like my Hapatra deck, which I am basing some of my suggestions off of because it is a black-green Aristocrats deck with a lot of token synergies, Harvest Season can easily grab 5 or 6 basics, and I think we are playing enough to get away with that. Yes, we are playing enough to get away with that. And that's really good. That's really good. You do have to sometimes make bad attacks, but 5 or 6 basics onto the battlefield guarantees your big cards or guarantees several small things, and I think you will very much so benefit from that. So answer 1 is just more ramp that is in theme of what we want. There's also some ramps that sacrifice creatures. There's some ramp that benefits in that way. Those are options that we can totally go for. But that's also my transition to the second kind of ramp, which is not land ramp, but sacrifice ramp, and I'm specifically thinking right now of Black Market. Yes, this is a 5 mana card, and I've asked you to remove some 5 mana cards, but this is a very good 5 mana card, and I would easily replace, I would say even, where is it? Where's our 5 mana cards? There they are. Seedborn Muse, and yeah, if you're cutting the other 5 mana cards, you might be able to fit this in nicely. Still, I want to suggest it. Black Market says whenever a creature dies, you put a charge counter, and at the start of your turn, you gain that much black mana for each charge counter. And that's a lot. Especially in a deck like this, this can represent an absurd amount of mana. And now specifically, this is really nice with like Sir Conrad because you can just funnel that black mana into this ability. But it's also important because it's very good with a lot of your aristocrat strategy. Carrion Feeder, Viscera Seer, Blood Artist, Zulport Cutthroat, Bastion of Remembrance. Like these are mono black cards. Victimize, Deadly Dispute, because I want to take out Village Rites. Ashnod's Altar is colorless. Sir Conrad completely is black mana, right? Pitiless Plunderer, Mirkwood Bats. These cards are all black mana, and so black market will completely pay for them, keeping the rest of your mana to do other things with. And that's not even just including the fact that you could just add other colors of mana to cast other things, but this can be very, very explosive here and get you into the phase where you can start casting, you know, Zayatora, Dragonlair Spider, or Dragon Broodmother. Though I will note for these last two, you really can't spend a lot of black market's mana on them because they're both very, very heavy in pips, and only 2 of their 6 mana can be in black. So that's an option. And then the last one is, I say Reanimator, and you don't really have a lot of Reanimator here, but I've been saying it because I see Victimize, and Victimize is really good here, and I look at Archon of Cruelty, and I want you to reanimate that card. I don't want you to cast it, right? Buried Alive is here, just an enabler, just put some, this is just like a sign that says, hey, just play some Reanimator, right? Like if you're going to play Victimize, play some Reanimator. If you play Victimize, Buried Alive, and then like Unearth, you can set up a lot of combos, right? That you would want. You can very easily something like Buried Alive for Carrion Feeder, Zulaport Cutthroat, and then like Mayhem Devil, and then Victimize into 2 of them, and then Unearth the 3rd, and you're pretty much set to start going off, right? Or just unearth, or do what I like to do, unearth 1 of your big targets and 2 of your smaller targets, so that when the, did I say unearth? I meant bury alive, 1 really big target, 2 of your smaller targets, and then reanimate at your leisure what you can. In order to do that, we would need more reanimation effects, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will always remind that the best one in your colors is Life and Death in terms of how much real life money versus power, as it is just reanimation at 2 mana, though it only hits your own graveyard, with reanimation being, I think, more than $10 now. Reanimation. Reanimate, right, sorry. Yeah, about $15 American minimum, which, if you ask me, is too much for this ability. Whereas Life and Death is literally, I think, like cents. Yeah, you can get it 10 cents off of Dominaria Remastered with cool new art too. That is really cool art. So I would say that is your 3rd angle of attack. Instead of land mana or sacrifice mana, you could just be reanimating some of these creatures. It is very much so an option. You know, I will say I like Buried Alive, but I do know it's kind of gone up in price. So you could play Unmarked Grave instead to bring back some of your bigger things because it is cheaper, but it is only 1 at a time. This is just a thought to throw out there. All right, so with all that in mind and the kind of directions I want to go in, let's take a look through the cards that you are suggesting here. So, Aggravated Assault is really, really good, but is a massive mana sink. It is a massive mana sink. And generally, it's used with a combo where when you gain mana from attacking or hitting players, and we do not have access to that combo. So we are playing Aggravated Assault incredibly fairly. And I don't know if I can recommend that. This is an expensive card to play fairly. Don't get me wrong, you will get a lot of benefit from it, but I find it hard to believe that you would get maybe more than 2 or 3 attacks with this, and that's including like basically dumping all of your mana into this card. Obviously, this gets... actually, this doesn't get better with Black Market, because you can't... Because, see, this untaps all creatures after this main phase. You can't just trigger this 10 times, right? Right? I don't know. I guess you need this to untap your creatures if they don't have vigilance, but you will probably get all the extra attacks otherwise. You just won't untap your creatures, which is a pretty big difference. So I think this is fine. This is very, very fair. I don't really love it, but you could get away with it. But I think there's better options. Even here, there's better options. Compy Swarm. If there was ever a card I'd want to take out of these universes, not within, the universes without, and turn it into just a Magic card and forget that the other universe stuff ever existed, it would be this one. This card is so cool. I love it so much. I hate these Jurassic Park cards. I'm not going to lie. I feel like I recognize this is how IPs work, but of the choices they've made outside of Lord of the Rings, I've hated almost all of them. I've never seen a single one of these Universe Beyonds that have gone, oh wow, this one feels really good. Now, every single one of them just makes me cringe. I can't lie. But still, hopefully this card will get into Universes Within, and I think this is such a good card. In the meantime, play it, absolutely. Obviously, there's a lot of cards here that have that kind of styling, and we do have Jurassic Park in here already. Compy's Swarm is so good. I might have to pick up a copy for Hapatra, even if it'll kill me. So, really good card. I do like it. Easy addition. Killer Service. This is another mana sink. This is another mana sink. So it's 3 mana to get 3 food tokens, and then you can sacrifice any token on your end step to turn any token into a 4/4 Rhino. I don't think this is where you want to be. This is more mana. This is just exasperating the problem. We are spending our mana establishing our board in tokens as opposed to our board to get to like our combo or get to our multiple attacks. So this doesn't really do anything for our plan, and it honestly feels like it's just going to slow us down. So I would say definitely don't play this one. Phyrexian Altar, I feel it's overkill. Ashnod's Altar is already there and you're doing fine. You already have enough sack outlets. If you really want it, I think you could play it instead of a Mana Rock, but it's close. I wouldn't personally. Woe Strider, same thing. I think you have enough sack outlets. This card is kind of clumsy. I do like that it comes back from your graveyard, but you just don't have means of putting it into your graveyard outside of fairly putting it into your graveyard. And since it can't sack itself, there's a lot of situations where it gets exiled, so you don't even get to escape it. So if we're just looking at this card for its first bit of text, it's really not that great. So I'd say no. Daemogoth Woe Eater is cute, but is clumsy. One, you need to sacrifice on upkeep if you want to either sacrifice this creature or if you want to keep it around to attack with a 7/6. If this was a die trigger, if this was when it died, I think this would be a lot better, right? The fact that you have to sacrifice it to get the trigger, so if you attack into someone and they block, but you're trading creatures, you're not going to get the effect even if you could sack it because you want to destroy their creatures. That's really clumsy. It's also 4 mana, same mana as our commander. This is a lot better if that we have ways to constantly reanimate it, but we don't. And once again, this ability is just not that good. I was talking about Pirate Reanimator in the deck creation video, and I was talking about Dusk Mangler. And if you compare these two abilities, like this is each opponent sacks, discards, and loses 4 life versus discard a card as the only thing that affects your opponents. This is obviously the comparison is very straightforward. And the only way I would play either is by reanimating, and I just don't think this current build, despite the things, like I've made some suggestions, but the current build is not just into reanimation, so I'm just going to skip it for sure and say too clunky. Death Reap Ritual, I'm pretty sure I suggested this. I think this is fine. Absolutely play it. If you're struggling to find something to replace it with, I'd probably take the bats out and just put this in and give that a try. Desecration Demon, very clunky. No one's ever going to sacrifice a creature. Nobody, it's commander. Nobody cares about a 6/6. 6/6s are just not very threatening. They either have removal or you're helping the Aristocrats deck, right? And they're happy to have a sack outlet. So I don't think this is pretty good. The fact that you cannot be the one to sacrifice is the big loss here. So easily we can cut that out. Eradicator Valkyrie, interesting card. I do like the boast. Just too clunky. Hexproof from Planeswalkers, that text might as well not exist. The 4/3 body makes it very fragile to like lightning bolts or other damage-based removal. And the boast only triggers on attack, so you can't even use it until your next turn. Very cool art. Very cool art. And I love the Angel Berserker creature type. Unfortunately, not where you want to be. Marin is great. Marin is a very strong card. I would suggest, I don't like Marin outside of the command zone because what she usually reads as 4 mana, draw a card at the end of the turn, and then she's probably removed before, if not after. So you're really paying 4 mana to draw a card from your graveyard. And with that in mind, I don't really like her here, especially because we just don't have means of putting cards into our graveyard outside of sacking them onto the from the battlefield. And that interaction is really, really fragile when she's not your commander. Like, one of the best parts of having her as your commander is that you get to keep the experience counters and keep bringing her back. Whereas here, you're just going to say bye to her, you know, and she's gone forever. So I don't particularly like her here. Archfiend of Depravity. This is cute. I don't really like it. This isn't the kind of deck that you want to be pressured. Like, this is good in a deck that's pressuring your opponent's their board states, and you're not really doing that. So it's just kind of a value creature that takes like one player's turn to even effect. So it means it's probably going to die. And there's just going to be a lot of boards that this doesn't do anything. This also, frustratingly, like, and I think this is the big problem. Let's say you're sitting across the board from me, and let's just say I'm playing like Relentless Rats style decks. You know, it's not even Relentless Rats, the other one, the 2-mana one. That might be Relentless Rats. Well, anyways, you know, a giant aggro deck, right? So this, I see you play this, it comes to my turn, and then I have an entire turn to deal with it. And that doesn't mean just destroying the Archfiend of Depravity. It means that I'm going to swing at you with everything. Because if I'm going to lose everything, I might as well send it all at you because it's your fault. Now, we do have some like Aristocrats benefits from this, but you're still going to get smashed in the face pretty hard, and you might lose the Archfiend in the process. And any creature you kill through combat, they're like, okay, cool, it's just one less creature I was going to sack. So this puts a giant target on you. Especially, like, my example was one of your opponents. Imagine if 2 or more of your opponents feel that way. This is just gonna lose you games. So absolutely not. Don't play this card. Korvold is stupid strong. Stupid strong. I'm gonna say something a little weird. Don't play this card. And the reason I'm going to say don't play this card is because you're going to get Korvold onto the battlefield once, and you're going to realize that Korvold should be your commander. And then the entire deck is going to be kind of pointless. Not necessarily. I mean, there's the fun of playing Xira for what she does, but Korvold is so good, is so stupidly good that just playing with it 5 minutes is just going to ruin the deck for you. So don't play Korvold. Or if you do, I mean, play Korvold as your commander. Port Razor, I think, is a very, very strong extra turn attack extra combat enabler, and I think it is stronger than Aggravated Assault. I think the problem is you don't have the means of giving them evasion, so it's kind of tricky to get those extra attacks in, and you don't have the means to grow Port Razor. Those are the two things I like. I want Port Razor to be very, very large, or I want it to have evasion, so that I prefer both, honestly, but I want that so these attacks will connect instead of setting Port Razor at like the one player who doesn't have blockers. And you don't have enough haste. Like, you don't have enough haste to kind of take advantage of that, right? You might be able to ping down blockers, but you're just going to lose the Port Razor before, because it has to wait an entire turn. So I'm going to say I don't particularly like this. I think you could make it happen, and it is definitely stronger than Aggravated Assault, but I don't particularly like this here. Aki Battle Squad is a lot better and could easily replace like Dragonlair Spider as your 6-mana finisher. But the only thing that I have to note, because I think this is my favorite card that you're adding in here. Here's the thing. The one you want to attack with is your commander. Do you know who's the creature that's the hardest for you to modify? It's your commander. Because Xira I should say, cannot put an egg counter on herself, which is fair. That would be horrifying. Even more horrifying. So with that in mind, how are you growing Xira, right? So modified specifically is equipment, aura, auras that you control, and counters. So we can easily note that we have only one aura that we do not want to put onto our commander. We have three pieces of equipment, two of which that are probably not on the same creature, one that you generally want to have on another creature because Skull Clamp doesn't belong, which so I will just cut this down to 2 where you're only going to pick one of each. So those are your options. And then how do we put +1/+1 counters onto our commander? And I'm pretty sure, or any counters, because we could put a -1/-1 counter. So we have Generous Patron, we have Mazarek, we have the Spitting Dilphosaurs, Dilophosaurs. See, this is why I didn't want to say it out loud. And I mean, is that it? Is that it? Am I missing anything? I think that's it, right? And that's just not very, very good. So, though I like it, I need you to put other ways to give your commander +1/+1 counters or equipment or auras. And right now the deck can't support that, which is too bad because Aki Battle Squad is really, really good here, but unfortunately doesn't work with the one creature you really, really want it to work with. So I'm going to suggest you think about this one the most. All right, let's finish it off because we're getting to 40 minutes. Morog, without enough fetch lands, I don't like this card. Pretty straightforward, very cool card. You need more fetch lands to make it work. Belladros, I like Belladros a little bit. You could kind of replace Dragon Lair Spider to kind of do the thing I was saying where Dragon Broodmother and Belladros do the same thing. The pay 10 life, untap all lands is really, really good. So this is very, very strong. So I would play it if you have access to it. It also has the benefit of like working with Black Market or other mainly black mana ramp. So that's very nice. So very easy inclusion if you want to do it. 7 mana is not 6 mana though. And we go back to our mana problems because that's a lot of mana to cast. However, a very, very strong card. Finally, let's end on Archon of Cruelty, a card I really, 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 really like. I love Archon of Cruelty. It's very, very strong. I have no idea how you're going to cast this though. This is just so much work for you to cast. You need to have Ashnod's Altar for sure. You need to have cast all your ramp. You need to do, have a board and not be knocked out of your game. Get to 8 mana and then play Archon of Cruelty to get a single trigger. We don't even have really reliable ways to give it haste. I don't particularly love this. I want, like with Lightning Greaves, I guess if you've gone into 8 mana, you've seen a good portion of your deck. So the odds of getting Lightning Greaves or Swiftwood Boots is pretty high. And then you're going to attack and get another trigger. That's pretty good. I don't think it's worth the work. If you are outside Reanimator, if you're not using one of those sneak attack decks, I don't think you can reasonably cast this. All right, and those are going to be my comments. Thank you so much for setting the deck, Shirok. I think I'm very, very happy with how it is. I think it's already in a very good spot. I've given you my last few kind of tips. As I mentioned before, I'm curious how much testing you're getting in between, because I think that's something that we tend not to think about a lot, is that we want to constantly improve our deck, but we need some, you need to test the deck. You need to find out how good it is by playing it and see how it wins, how it loses. And, I'm looking for those kind of comments sometimes. I'm looking for something saying, in testing, I've noticed this is bad. In testing, this is good. You don't have to do these comments, but I find they help us a lot to kind of focus on what the deck needs to improve. But until then, I look forward to the next draft of this deck, or any deck, which you can send to me from the video description down below. And if you'd like to be one of the donation decks that are guaranteed to show up every time I make videos, there is a link for that down below. And finally, if you'd like, comment, subscribe, I would be very, very appreciative. The channel is still growing and making a lot of waves, I hope. All right, thank you so much. Good luck with the deck, and I'll see you next time.